He is here. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to contribute to this debate. And from the onset, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I support this session of paper. But I would like to caution my colleagues, Mr. Speaker. The gender discussion cannot be a woman discussion. When we talk about gender, we don't talk about women. We talk about both men and women. And recently, Kenya became the first African country to carry out a census of another gender we are calling intersex. And Mr. Speaker, our census showed that we have 1,524 intersex people. These are people who are neither male nor are they female. And what this census paper is trying to do and say is that we need equality in terms of gender. But how do we get to achieve this equality, Mr. Speaker? It's when we ensure there is a fair play field for people of whichever gender that we pick on, Mr. Speaker. The earlier speakers have demonstrated that we have great leaders. And some of those great leaders, and most of those great leaders, happen to be women, happen to be men. And therefore, there should be no time where someone should be discriminated against for a particular position because they hold a particular gender. And maybe this even calls for discussion in our families, in our meetings. Why is it that every time we have even a small meeting, we tell the woman to take the minutes? It is probably because we still have that thinking that a woman can only be to a level of a secretary. I'm not saying a secretary is bad, but there's a way even as a society we've put women that shows that they're supposed to only do particular jobs. But this, Mr. Speaker, needs to make sure that it ends. But how do we achieve that? It's not just putting it on paper like you're doing today, but a change of heart as a country, as a community, and as a nation. When we have places that we can employ people of different gender, do we do that? As members of parliament, what is the composition of our parliamentary staff? In our constituencies, how is the composition of our staff? Because we can put all these things in paper, but it's going to take goodwill to make sure that whichever gender that we pick on, we give them opportunities and we don't discriminate which gender they come from, Mr. Speaker. It's quite a shame that women, and especially young girls in school, still have to struggle with matters of menstrual health. It is such an embarrassment that we hear tales of young girls using mattresses and all manner of things. And, Mr. Speaker, if you go to some of these public offices, you find packets of condoms displayed for free in the toilets. And yet, a basic thing than like a menstrual, like sanitary towels, is not availed to these people. And every time, every year, it becomes an audit query, even when government plans to support these young girls with these sanitary towels. Every year, it becomes an audit query. So if we cannot give our young girls sanitary towels, how can we pride ourselves in being a nation? How can we even have a gender discussion? How can we even go to these conventions and say how far we have achieved in terms of gender parity in this country? This issue must be put to rest. And I saw that proposal, Mr. Speaker, on the BBI that suggests that the issue of menstrual health, the issue of provision of sanitary towels should be free to every school-going child in this country. And if there is a way that is going to be implemented, even before we wait on whether it is going to pass or not, even in the current budget for the Ministry of Gender and the Ministry of Education, how do they make sure that these girls that are at home now get access to these sanitary towels? I've been asking myself, when there was school-going time, then the ministry would provide these sanitary towels to these children, to these girls. After COVID, I have not seen any ministry distributing them to these girls. What happened? Or do these girls only get their menses when they are at school and not when they are at home? We need to be very candid. And these things that touch very closely to this gender must be well thought through. The issue of female genital mutilation, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, we are still talking about girls that have been forced to undergo female genital mutilation. We still have elders, nyumba kumi people who are sitting in the village discussing about a 13-year-old who have been married to a 60-year-old. We are still having family conversations about a 12-year-old who have got pregnant by someone who is 50 years old. And now we are putting it as a discussion of how much compensation you should give to this guy. These are things that people of goodwill, that like leaders, we must stand up against and make sure, Mr. Speaker, that they never get to happen again. And as much as we're talking about, and that's why I started by saying that gender is not a woman issue. It is a humanity issue. So in the same way, there are matters that are affecting our boys that have not been looked into for a very long time. I will, for example, take the issue of circumcision, for example. What scrutiny is done to these young boys when they go to that initiation in Christmas? We're slowly heading to Christmas. And sometimes that transition period is used to radicalize our young people, to introduce them to drugs, to introduce them to some ideologies, Mr. Speaker, that make them become rogue people when they grow up, Mr. Speaker. So as much as we're looking at empowerment programs for our other gender, when we make gender conversion not a man or a woman issue, then we'll make sure that no one is left behind, including the boy child, including the girl child. No one should be left behind because of what is between their legs, because nobody chooses on what is between their legs. And that, Mr. Speaker, I really support this conversation. But allow me to add one thing. It's very heartening that we still choose to refer to tell someone is a woman as an insult. That in 2020, we imagine that calling somebody, quote unquote, mama, ama kona umama, is an insult. These are some of the discussions that bring us down as a community from having a harmonious, gender-sensitive community. And that, Mr. Speaker, I support.